Okay, so we have to calibrate our torque wrench when it is annually dropped, abused. When you don't have a hammer and that's what you use, then you have to.
Why would you use a hammer?
Why? Because you didn't want to go to the tool room.
I've done that before.
Proper procedures. This proper procedure is necessary for proper torque. So one of the great things about having that little torque machine at my disposal when I was doing engines is if you haven't had engines yet, you don't appreciate the fact that a cylinder-based wrench is about that long and it goes out, straight, back in, and at an angle. And it's aligned up so you don't have to do any adjustment to the torque, which I'll show you in a minute. So if your torque wrench says 300 inch-pounds, you're putting 300 inch-pounds at the end, in theory. But if you actually take and practice with that tool, you can see that you can be off by a lot. So there's a lot of room for human error involved. So one of the things about having the machine is I could calibrate myself. So not only would I set my torque wrench for what I wanted it to, but I would also go to the machine and kind of practice a few times. And doing that enough, you can actually see and experiment, well, what will make it go higher torque than I wanted? What will make it go less torque than what I wanted? And you can see just how much error you can induce in a torque wrench if you're not careful. So it's a good way to learn. So one, you have to hold the wrench properly. Hold the wrench properly. Let's see here. Pictures. They're designed to be held in an exact spot. So, for example, this one is designed to be held in this area right here. Let me see. This one I told you about the fulcrum point, which is really helpful. This one, it has the effective length is right here. So this should be centered right below your hand. You shouldn't be holding it back at the end or up here in the middle, but this goes right in the middle of your palm when you're pulling. And these are a little bit more obvious because it's called knurling. This is knurling. And it's knurled right there. You should be holding it right there and only right there. And it sounds like, well, no kidding, but you'd be surprised. So hold it properly. Apply. Steady. And even pressure. Especially with click types, I can make a click type click just about anywhere you want. Just put it on there, pull hard enough and fast enough, and it'll click. And that is not proper torque. So you have to pull even and steady. And you should not start and stop. Did I write that here? Well, do not jerk. Do not jerk. Nor be a jerk. So don't jerk it and don't be a jerk. Do not start and stop. Well, that's easier said than done. Sometimes when you're working, especially with cylinder bases, you have to start and stop because you go a little bit, take it off, put it back on a little bit more. But the idea is you are not supposed to move the nut just a little bit because it takes a certain amount of torque to get the nut going. And when it's going, so what it'll be like you'll stop when it wasn't torqued enough, then you back the wrench off and go again, and it clicks. And you're like, oh, I guess I was done. Well, that was weird. Well, it's because it takes extra torque to get the nut moving. Once it's moving, then that's a different torque setting. So you want to start and go all the way until you get the right torque, if you can. You can't always do that, so don't start and stop. Use the correct torque chart. Where am I going to find the correct torque chart? AC 4313-1B is the incorrect answer.
Maintenance manual.
Manufacturer. Maintenance manual. Manual prevails. And what I mean by that is the absolute authority. First thing you go to is the maintenance manual. And in the maintenance manual, often it will call out the specific torque for the item you're doing. Like in engines, it'll say the connecting rods should be torqued to 240 inch-pounds. Then sometimes it doesn't. It won't say anything. It'll say something like, and install the oil filter and torque. Like, well, in torque, well, you didn't give me a torque. Where's the torque for that? Then that's the general torque that the manufacturer gives you. So they will also give you a chart that looks like the one in 4313 that is applicable to that item. So that's like, unless otherwise specified, use the general torque. So it's specific and general. Dennis, you had a
I said rocker box covers.
good rocker box covers. They don't have a specific torque. It's just they're just quarter 20 screws. And so you just go, the chart says quarter 20 screws, 96 inch-pounds. You're like, oh, okay, I can do that. If the okay, so while we're working on one of these, an old Cub or a Champ or something like that, and it doesn't say much about anything, then where do I go?
What's the proof of that?
Then I go to 4313. And 4313, see, then, see, manufacturer's maintenance manual prevails. Specific torque, I should say that, maintenance for specific. Then, the maintenance manual, general torque. So that's the chart. So I would do the specific torque, then the maintenance manual general torque, and if neither one of those say anything, then if no other data, use 4313. And that is good for what kind of nuts, bolts? Oil free, CAD plated, clean threads, on and on. If not, yeah.
Oh, I just, for like procedures, I just heard people always say with like the click type, don't ever use the ratchet, just use it when you're about to torque. Like if you're...
Oh yeah, because you don't want to start and stop.
Yeah.
So even though the click type do have a ratcheting head on it, you shouldn't be going ratchet, pull, this. It's, you put it on, you start, and I will go all the way and keep walking until it wants to click. So if necessary, something, I don't know what I was going to write. If necessary, add friction torque to final torque. What I mean by that is if we go back to talking about the prevailing torque for nuts that have self-locking mechanisms, and we said that a certain nut may have to have 10 inch-pounds in order for it to be good. You have to add that 10 inch-pounds to your final torque. So if I'm looking at a nut that says, well, you should torque it to 100 inch-pounds, and the prevailing torque is 10, at least 10, so it takes 10 inch-pounds to move the nut, and I'm supposed to go to 100, I have to add the 10 to the 100.
That was over in
You're looking at me funny, Shrey. That's just a normal look? I'm sorry.
That isn't good, but I saw it in the manual.
So everybody- I don't remember which manual, but everybody understands that, right? So add the drag torque, which is friction torque or drag torque. That's how much it takes to turn the nut or the bolt to the final torque. J, K, this is a very important point. Some applications call for wet torque. Wet torque. The amount of torque, let's try that again. Wet torque, I'll put this, with a specific lubricant. Wet torque increases torque by about 40%. So in other words, if it was supposed to be 100 inch-pounds and you add some oil to it, you just got 140 out of it and didn't realize it. And some call for dry torque. Right. almost everything is dry torque. Engines are wet. So unless otherwise specified, assume that it's a dry torque. So, but here's the thing, as I mentioned the other day, when you're torquing a nut and a bolt combination, and you're tightening that nut, what you're using is some sort of apparatus to see the twist on the nut. And that doesn't mean anything because the bolt is stretching, so you want it in stretch. And it's just an engineer figured out that a nut this size, if you twist it by this amount with threads that are in this condition, will pull the bolt by this many PSI, which will give you the proper preload, which is really what you're after. And as I said before, in a perfect world, we would actually just measure how much the bolt stretches on everything. There would be no twist to it. Nobody would care. It would simply be tighten the bolt until you achieve a twist of 1/1000th of an inch or 0.5 thousandths or some. That would be a perfect world. Now, it's exactly what we're trying to achieve. But that doesn't work that way. So the engineers come up with a torque chart and say, if you twist it and you are pulling on a lever of 100 inch-pounds, then the bolt will have been stretched or tightened by X number amount, and that's what we really want. So it becomes critical when you talk about thread condition. So that chart in 4313 says they're supposed to be oil-free, dry, CAD-plated, and good condition. And that's what the engineers figure out. Well, then we go to look at an engine, and an engine manufacturers, they're different. They're like, well, we want our stuff oiled. And they don't want just oil. They want a mixture like 40% STP to 60% 100-weight oil. And it's very specific how they want that. And there are some places where they want food-grade lubricant to be used, like food-grade lubricant inside of an engine. Okay, if you call for it. You know, I think it's just mayonnaise, if you ask me, but it looks like it. So they get very, very specific. And if you guys remember, it was the bolt that goes into the crank gear. You know, you have to put it on the first 3 threads, and you wipe off the excess, and you do this, and there's all these different things. But I will tell you this. For those of you going into it next semester, when something says wet torque, if I can't see the wet torque from across the shop, it's not a wet torque to me. So when I wet torque stuff, some people like to give out little tiny cans and you put a little drop on there for your little wet torque. Okay, I don't wet torque that way. I've got a can, paint can, and I take a paintbrush and I use it like a scooper and I scoop it out and I put it on and it runs on the floor and I get the threads are coated and the surface where the nut is spinning is coated. I'm like, that's a wet torque, right? And that's how I put it together because that's what wet torque means. It doesn't mean a little drop of oil on a few threads. You got to have the nut face that is twisting against the part. That's got to be well lubricated. The threads have to be well lubricated. Everything's got to be well lubricated. That's what the engineer had in mind, not, So I will, yes, there will be.
So you're saying James is going to have to take out a second mortgage just to pay for the
I will take the brunt of that. How is it possible that you guys use the same 8 quarts of oil to put together these engines? All right. You should see my shirts when I built engines. You knew what I did for a living. It's like, oh, did you roll in it? Because by the time I'm putting the cylinders on, they're against my shirt, and they're all well oiled and lubricated. That's how you do it. All right. Sometimes you have to use a torque adapter. So use of a torque adapter. All right. You did this in 309, so I don't have to spend much time on this, right?
Yeah.
All right. I can just go through it real quick. Yes, I'm still doing that in 309, right? Okay. Remember, if you add something to the front of it, this dial is going to read less than what it's supposed to read. So you have to do the math. And there's going to be a test question on how to do that. And if it goes backwards, you have to subtract that to get the right. And I know I just freaked you out because I said it'll be on the test, but let me see.
Well, actually,
I give you the formulas. All right. By the time I spend doing this, I could have just retaught you. Let me see. I don't think I tell you what T, L, and E are. So you have to remember that. So the formula for forward is T times L. T is Torque times the length. Where do you find this length? On the torque wrench, right on the handle. Okay. L, which again is length, plus E extension. So torque times length divided by length plus extension equals Y desired desired torque. All right. If you go backwards, you just have to remember that it's L minus E. And if it's sideways, then in theory it doesn't change. It does though. All right. Let's see what else we got. Bolts are installed with the head facing up, forward, and out. Wish I had a little picture like that, but I can't draw well. So when you are going up to an aircraft and you're like, hey, I've got to bolt this item on, the bolt should go down. Why down?
Because if the nut comes off, it's not falling out.
If the nut falls off, then the bolt at least hopefully stays. Or forward. I think the wind pressure holds it on there. And then it's from the outside in. I don't know about that one because you think, well, if I turn, that one's going to fall out, but that one at least stays. So the way I remember that is to think about it, well, if I drew a little picture, I would have the bolt facing forward and one coming down like a helicopter. And these would make like kind of a winglet coming in. So there's little winglets out there, the bolt heads, and that's how I remember that. Do not use self-locking nuts in areas where the loss of a nut can result in engine failure, such as a turbine engine inlet. That's right out of the book. What else we got? AOPA.
Is that like AARP?